Republican Paul Ryan's budget proposal for 2012 would cut about $6 trillion from federal spending over the next 10 years. The House is supposed to vote on it this Friday. Of course, the Democrats hate it. But now, according to reports, some Republican lawmakers aren't fans of it either and are avoiding saying how they plan to vote. Congressman Ryan's cuts are too big for many mainstream Republicans and too small for many libertarians. So will the House pass it? Who better to ask than a Democrat? Kirsten Powers, the New York Post columnist, Fox News analyst, and my friend. Kirsten, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to the Glenn Beck program.
Great to be here.
What's your take on what the House will do? I mean, the leadership is in favor of this. Even some libertarian-leaning members of Congress, like Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, who was just on right before you, is in favor of it, though I didn't know that until a few moments ago. Do you think that Congressman Ryan's plan passes the House, even though there are misgivings all across the board amongst Republicans?
Yeah, I do. I haven't really heard that much in terms of an expectation that it wouldn't pass. There certainly, I'm sure, are some Republicans who are a little leery of it because there are such draconian cuts in it, and they might be afraid of some sort of blowback from their constituents. But you have to remember, the Republicans are really, this is really directed at their base, and I think that they're very afraid of what will happen if they don't deliver on the promises that they made. All
right, just as the president obviously had his eye on his base this afternoon when he talked about raising taxes on the rich, is this something done for the base? Because I'm talking about Congressman Ryan's proposals, because even if it passes the House, isn't it dead on arrival in the Senate?
Yeah, totally dead on arrival. I mean, it would never, ever go anywhere in the Senate, and of course the president would veto it. So it's so far removed, really, from what anybody else is talking about, whether it's President Obama or the Gang of Six or the Simpson Bulls. It's just so far away that it's just going to go nowhere.
All right. When you say the Gang of Six, this is 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans in the Senate who are attempting to craft legislation along the lines of what the President's Debt Commission, you referred to it by its common name, Simpson Bowles, after the co-chairs of the commission. Is there a chance then, Kirsten, that some other proposal could be before the Congress? We have the President's, we have Rand Paul's, which cuts $500 billion a year. We have Congressman Ryan's. Is there going to be some sort of moderate compromise that will pop up and go to the House before it makes its way to the Senate?
Well, I mean, that certainly would be the hope. But if you listen to the Republicans, that they don't sound open to that at all. I mean, like I said, they have staked themselves so far out away from really anything that I consider reasonable. You know, I mean, I know a lot of people are lauding this as very, Congressman Ryan's budget as being this very bold budget. I mean, it's bold in the sense that it's kind of out there, you know, but it's not really going to ever go anywhere. And I think what the president was doing today was really just reiterating what our social compact is in this country. And it's not to essentially get rid of Medicare and Medicaid, which is what that budget would do.
Did the president reiterate that today, Kirsten, because he perceived that he had a problem on his left flank after some of the compromises with which he's gone along in the past 4 months, like in December when he signed the Bush-era tax rates into law yet again, and last week when he went along with the midnight agreement to prevent the government from closing down, something that really aggravated his friends on the left come Monday morning.
Yeah. Well, look, the left has been upset with him for a long time. I don't know how many times that story can be written, actually. Every time the left is upset with Obama, it's like, oh, okay. They're actually very happy about the speech that he gave today. And I think that, you know, that I don't think that's only who he was trying to reach, however. What's interesting about Congressman Ryan's budget is that it's really the underlying ideas are quite unpopular with most Americans. Most Americans, believe it or not, never wanted the tax cuts for the rich extended even this last time, and they certainly don't want more tax cuts for the rich.
Is there still a divide amongst the Republicans in the House between the mainstream, what I like to call big government Republicans, and the small government libertarians, or will they come together on something, whether it's Congressman Ryan's proposal or something, so that they appear unified? Because if the Democrats pick off the libertarians, I don't think John Boehner has a majority.
Well, I mean, they seem pretty unified right now, you know, and they seem fairly unified around this budget. And I you know, there are some theories out there among Democrats that the Republicans don't really want a budget to pass. That if there is a budget that passes, that'll be good for Obama, and especially if it's a good budget. And so it could just be that they're perfectly happy just to kind of gum up the gears. So that's an alternate theory.
Okay. Kirsten Powers, pleasure as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, the truth about inflation the Fed is not likely to tell you. Oil and food prices are surging, but the Federal Reserve is trying to tell us not to worry about inflation. The Fed's second highest ranking official, Vice Chair Janet Yellen, just said price increases of oil, grain, and other commodities are, quote, unlikely to have persistent effects on consumer inflation or to derail the economic recovery. What recovery? Should we pay any attention to the central bank that monetizes billions of our debt by printing cash? Let's ask syndicated radio talk show host and my friend Nancy Skinner and Mark Calabria, Director of Financial Regulation Studies at the Cato Institute. Mark, to you first. Does the Fed just so enjoy its position of dominance in our economic system that it will not look at things like gasoline, potatoes, corn, and beer going up almost right before our very eyes?
Well, I think the Fed is stuck in this framework where more inflation is going to get us more employment. They're stuck in this Keynesian Phillips curve framework that is simply broken. It is simply false. So I think with their mindset, they don't want to acknowledge these things because they would admit that there are costs to the actions that they're pursuing. They're going to pursue this course regardless because they look at the unemployment numbers. That's all they look at, and they believe that the more money they pump out there, they'll be able to bring down the unemployment numbers. Now, since I think that's false, they're absolutely ignoring what are very real costs in the economy. All right,
Nancy, you are a woman of the people. You stand up for the little guys. I know this because we do this all the time on Freedom Watch. Isn't it really the middle class and even the poorer folks among us who get hurt the most by the Fed's money printing, inflation causing problems? You might be able to afford $4 a gallon for gasoline, but a lot of people will think twice about driving to work if it costs them that much to fill the tank.
Well, here's the thing, Judge, that your solution, even if I assume you to be correct, and I don't, because there's a difference between wage inflation and energy and commodities, as we've discussed many times.
We're talking about price inflation.
Because you know what? Wage inflation is what we really worry about, because that means there's enough pricing power that everyone, we're so employed that workers can demand more wages, and so the price of everything goes up. In this case, we have commodities and energy.
Right.
But I'll go with your premise and say that we should do something, okay? So what do? We raise inflation, we raise interest rates. What does that do? That crushes our economic recovery. That crushes the people who are trying to work. The price of gas will go down. The price of commodities will come down. But overall, you don't want to raise interest rates. And if you're worried about our deficit in this situation, you raise interest rates, that makes bonds less attractive.
All right, I understand the argument. I understand the argument.
We'd have to raise, our debt goes up.
But Mark, this argument presumes that central control of the economy is a better market mechanism than the free choices of free people. Why don't we have that in our system?
And that's the important thing, is these record low rates are also distorting the banking system. Right now, banks could just load up on government debt, borrow from the Fed, and enjoy a 3% spread risk-free. They have no incentive. It's actually a false sort of belief that the banking system stopped lending. They just changed to who they were lending to. Bank balance sheets actually increased because they kept buying more and more government debt and less business loans.
All right.
Now, if you believe that more government debt's productive for the economy, that's great. But if you actually think we're going to get out of this by growing business, then we're going the absolute wrong direction.
All right. More with Nancy Skinner and Mark Calabria. We'll get right back to you, Nancy, right after the break. Still with us, our syndicated radio talk show host Nancy Skinner and Mark Calabria, Director of Financial Regulation Studies at the Cato Institute. As promised, Nancy, to you first. I gather you heard the president earlier today. A, were you pleased with what he said? B, do you think he had to say that in order to avoid a mass exodus of his base on the left?
I was pleased, of course. That's not a surprise to you, Judge. But no, I don't think he says anything politically to appease either side, actually. I've known President Obama for a long time now. He's a pragmatist, though. And so what he said is, look, now that we got past this but this year, we got to make big choices. And we have just begun talking about the major entitlements. And he is willing to make some changes in entitlements. But what he will not do is he will not, like Paul Ryan wants to, take Medicare and turn it into an $8,000 voucher for seniors while giving $1 trillion more in tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. He's got to draw that line. And some programs he will cut that the left likes.
Mark, if anything raises my blood pressure, it's when people say give tax cuts. You know what? The money that we earn belongs to us.
It's our own.
It does not belong to the government to decide how much we should keep. Another philosophical debate for another time. Mark, to your expertise, what kind of sense does it make to raise taxes on anybody during a recession? I got 3 Democrats right here. Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, Ben Nelson of Nebraska, all 3 of whom said we will never raise taxes during a recession.
And that's exactly what you don't want to do. You don't want to raise taxes during a recession. I mean, that's actually Keynes 101. If you buy into the Keynesian framework, it says that raising taxes are contractionary. And in fact, many of the criticisms of Roosevelt was he tried to run a balanced budget during the 30s, which actually contracted the economy. So I would say you need to be worried about the long-term deficit. I agree with that. I don't think you want to raise taxes right now. I would not deal with the long-term deficit by raising taxes. I think it's important to keep in mind, though, that the Ryan plan actually talks about lowering and eliminating deductions to allow you to pay for the decrease in the rates. It's actually, the tax side of it is budget neutral. It's not a tax cut. And the president's own commission expressed the same thing. Let's get rid of the deductions.
Nancy, we have less than a minute left. I'll let you get the last word. What do you think happens? Where do you see this going? Do the Republicans pass Paul Ryan and it's dead on arrival in the Senate? Is the president's proposal to raise taxes dead on arrival in the House? Are we in for perpetual stalemate?
I think that he already extended those tax cuts to do that, just to make sure that there was no repercussions during this recession. But he won't go further. Those were to be sunset by Bush and the Republicans. They enacted that in case we had deficits. Well, we do. So he's not. That is the long-term deficit. We have to phase in these cuts so it doesn't kill our recovery now. And that's what he's doing. Let's keep the investment. And so I think the Republicans will pass that bill, and I think it's going to politically kill them, because when seniors find out that Medicare is going to be a voucher.
Appreciate it. Nancy Skinner, Mark Calabria, thank you for joining us. My final thoughts on all of this next. Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Can previous generations enact social welfare programs or build an empire around the world financed by borrowing and then enslave subsequent generations to pay for it in perpetuity? Or do individuals have a responsibility to pay their own way and take care of themselves? Tonight, Thomas Jefferson and the meaning of liberty. Today is the anniversary of Thomas Jefferson's birth. He is the American original who created the American Republic. He authored the most famous phrase in American history, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. His legacy of natural rights, that our liberties come from God and not from the government, lives on in the hearts and minds of freedom-loving people throughout all the world. But what would Jefferson think of us if he were alive today? He once remarked that it is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes. Would he be proud of what we've become, or would he turn his back on a nation that squandered his legacy? Could he even have imagined our present debt? It was reported just yesterday that in the last 6 months, the debt of the federal government increased by 15%. That is an enormous sum in a very short period of time. And it highlights the dangerous and historic times in which we live as we shoulder an unprecedented $14.3 trillion debt burden. That is a sum that is so astronomical, it defies comparison. So let me try. If you laid out 1 trillion $1 bills end to end, they would stretch from the earth to the sun. If you did the same with dollar bills only going to the moon, they would go to the moon and back 300 times, 200 times. If you spent $1 a second, it would take you 32,000 years to spend $1 trillion. That's longer than all of recorded human history. Now multiply all this by 14, and you still need to add another $300 billion to visualize the government's debt. It is truly unimaginable in size. But the Congress lets the president borrow more than $1 trillion a year. It's ridiculous. It's unconscionable. It's immoral. And it's dangerous. And we don't have the money to pay it back. Only an informed and educated public, which is our goal here at Fox, can restore fiscal sanity. Like in Jefferson's days, these are the times that try men's and women's souls. The modern-day struggle for liberty is a renewed fight from a long-forgotten age. The founding of the American Republic was defined not simply by throwing off the yoke of the British Empire, for when the Revolution ended, the founders were left to argue and battle amongst one another to create a government on their own. Just like our politicians today, they became corrupted by too much power. And many of the founding fathers began to lust for more power and desired to shape the American Republic toward big government. But not Thomas Jefferson. With a few minor exceptions, the Jeffersonian band, the anti-federalists, who believed in small government and maximum individual liberty, struggled against the power-hungry big government types at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. The big government types, the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, were dissatisfied with the Articles of Confederation that had held the states together loosely, but left them largely alone to govern their own affairs. Although the Federalists were victorious in drafting the Constitution with a stronger central government, the Anti-Federalists were successful in restraining the new central government with the Bill of Rights. But the fight to limit the power of the new federal government would go on, and Jefferson would continue to be at the vanguard of that fight. In 1798, he secretly authored the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. These declarations were a response to the Alien and Sedition Acts that the Congress had just enacted that criminalized free speech. The modern equivalent of the Alien and Sedition Acts, Woodrow Wilson's Espionage Act of 1917, is still the law today, and even as we speak is being used to silence the speech of those who embarrass the federal government. Would Jefferson be happy with the federal government today? Well, his arguments that the best government governs least, once long forgotten, have been revived through the Tea Parties and the assertion of the rights of the states to nullify federal action not authorized by the Constitution. Would our hero be happy on his birthday? Only if we continue our current push for the principles that he lived for. The grassroots are alive and thriving. Many more Americans than ever before now see that the emperor wears no clothes and the government only has the power that we give it. So what shall it be, America? Do we let big government continue to spend and regulate us into economic slavery? Or do we continue our push to breathe life into Jefferson's legacy? The choice is yours, and the choice is obvious. Tonight on Freedom Watch, on the Fox Business Network at 8 p.m., Ohio Congressman Dennis the Menace Kucinich on why the president's war in Libya is wrong, illegal, and unconstitutional. From New York, defending freedom. So long, America.